The narrative has been built, you can't change it. This was an attempt by the Soviets to change the narrative. On the one hand, we relied on them for several things, but the common narrative was the one that held in pro West, pro everything good was necessarily coming from either England or Germany or USA.
About how the CIA and the KGB was actually trying to manipulate the narrative around them, and how for the very first time we have seen a lot of magazines, as you have mentioned in the book as well, were controlled by them. If you could talk about how during that period, it was the initial stages of how what we are seeing in information warfare right now. If you could talk about what was happening in that period during the Cold War.
Well, both sides had their armory of media, TV, later um, literature, arts, culture. Everything was thrown into the game. My culture is superior than yours. My art is better than yours. My literature is better than yours. You had Arthur Kessler writing that book on the Cold War, and there was the Life magazine, Time magazine. They all were contributing to selling the American story to the world over. There used to be a separate Asia edition of Time magazine, I think also Pacific edition, a European edition, and an American edition, where the nuances, the stress on the story was different. So we had that kind of campaign all over. The Americans had their publications sold in Delhi. Voice of America and BBC were very active. And then, see, the West has means that the rest of us don't have. We have nothing like Reuters, we have nothing like AFP, we have nothing like CNN, BBC. BBC is perhaps the most watched TV channel in the world. And then you have Fox and New York Times and Washington Post, all of them are avidly read. The Russians and the Chinese don't have that kind of a reach simply because they don't command the English channels as it were. They only had their own Russian or Chinese versions or their translations, which didn't go very far.
Before India's independence, the British was there. It is understandable. But right after independence, India's narrative has still not improved. In the sense, was not nationalistic. It did not have a narrative on its own. And I think in the book you also mentioned of a CIA report which talked about how over 1,60,000 of the most items in the freest press of India was under the KGB. It was directly or indirectly funded by that. They had access to the corridors of power, both the CIA and the KGB, and it was a time that no one trusted the another because any information might be on someone, might be received by the other end as well. So, how was this possible to build up such a network in India?
When we got independence at a time when we were still beholden to the British for everything. The story was that they gave us so much. They gave us railways, they gave us the English language. So we have an advantage. They're good guys. They're very fair-minded. That's their narrative that we had bought. So it was easy for the system to adapt yourself. And then the Nehruvian socialism felt that, doing everything in English was the proper thing to do. You talk in English, if you don't speak proper English, you're no good, you're not intelligent. So you've already got an advantage on your golf course. So why bother about anything else? The Indian newspapers can publish any amount of stories about what that may be pro-Russian or pro-Soviet, but the image of the West did not change because we were not inclined to change it. How many of us ever sent their children for studies to Moscow? How many of us sent our children to study in Oxford and Cambridge and Stanford or wherever? Why? Because the heart was there. The arrangement with the Soviets was a political, strategic necessity of the time. You were socialist, we were going to get those big dams, we were going to get Bharat Heavy Electronics, some of those mega corporations, state funded build. The Russians would help with the steel plants, etc., etc. So we were halfway there strategically, economically. But you ask anybody else, would you like to send Ratnadeep to study in St. Petersburg? I don't think would have been agreed to. The choice was, should I send him to Sorbonne or Oxford? So, you don't, I don't know whether you remember if you had a commodity or a chappal made in Japan, it was inferior. If it comes from Germany, it was good.
Yeah.
So it's the Japani है इसको फेंक दो. Now it's different, but that time that was the story.
Yeah.
So numerically maybe they got those articles, but I don't see that having made much of a difference, except for the die-hard communists and the leftists who loved it.
My next, my next question is actually in two parts. So about American soft power and how it is shaping the global narrative. And even though we have seen America committing a lot of war crimes, whether in Iraq or whether in Afghanistan as well, recently the reports as well said a lot of I mean, during the time of Obama, as there has been a lot of more war crimes as well in Trump. There was a recent report, and still we have seen a narrative that was built that of how Obama is democratic, of how liberal his policies are, and there has been a plausible deniability throughout the way even there have been war crime and human rights violation, and yet American can lecture the other countries about human rights violation.
You know, like I said somewhere else, the rich and powerful determine what is to be done, whether it's in a family or in a village or you know, it's the powerful man who decides what is to be done, and is looked upon as the wise person, intelligent. He's successful, therefore he must be wise. So whatever he says is wisdom. So you first get rich yourself, and they got rich at a time of the colonies. And the colonies came to Britain, and Britain took advantage of the situations when they had, and they were able to colonize the world. And from there, the Americans took over. Once you have achieved that, and once you want to stay there, you have to do a couple of few things. You must be able to have the strongest military force, your economy must be strong, and your technology should be always ahead of the rest. But all this doesn't work to the extent it should unless you have a storyline. Unless you can tell me that you are superior to me, fine. Not only that, but I am inferior to you. Why is it today, after the abolition of slavery and all that, Black Lives Matter? Because so far the story has been suppressed. The Americans said that Iraq had Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and Al Qaeda. That was the narrative.
Yeah.
That was a tactical narrative for the day, not a strategic narrative for the life. That was the narrative for the day. and they succeeded. Then nobody bothered. Abu Ghraib happened, this thing happened. All was put away.
On a similar note, like how can America be able to backtrack on certain stand they take? For example, when the invention of Soviet happened in Afghanistan, the Mujahideens and the Taliban were projected as heroes. And right now, the narrative goes on: they're the villains out there when Americans are losing their lives. Or how does 1,000 lives, some 3,000 lives lost on in American soil due to an attack is projected a global war on terrorism, and there's a new field of terrorism studies that emerged post 9/11. But when millions of lives are lost in Iraq or in Afghanistan, is just a byproduct of a war that's happening, and it's just like any other thing that comes with the American thing of like it's for their good. This is happening.
Because the loser doesn't have a voice, the loser doesn't have a story to tell. He has no means to tell. Stories are only being told by one party. And in that group, there may be people who differentiate between whether it should be done this way or that way. But there's no distinction about, there's no dispute that you are first, that you are the prime country, you should remain there. Whether you want to go through Iraq or Syria, those are tactical things which you can argue about, talk about, whether Abu Ghraib, that thing should have happened, whether they should have been doing those enhanced interrogation techniques, torture cells. Those are nuancial arguments that we get involved in and thinking that they are very honest, they're very straightforward. They talk about all these things after the event, if you notice, not when the war is on.
Yeah.
After the thing is gone, you won, and then you come out with these stories and you say, oh, such noble souls, they sort of criticizing this pattern, but not when you're fighting that war. When Bush decided to send in troops, there was hardly anybody opposing it. Similarly, in Afghanistan, you can use all sorts of weaponry there. You can try it out, but nobody said. They were at one stage ready to do a deal with the Taliban because they could get UNICAL was involved. Christina Rocca and that NSA of that time was involved, wanting to get Taliban in on their side because they thought this would be the oil route from Turkmenistan into the Arabian Sea to undercut the Soviets. So that time, the, Russia. So these are things that these people always play. You have to understand that this is what I'm saying. Your narrative is something else. The narrative of the Americans of the Western world was that you must annihilate communism. Okay, the fight was with Soviet Union. And who did they have on their side for fighting for democracy? 65 or 66 or whatever dictatorships. Look at the irony of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you patch up with China, whose leader Mao had killed 40 million people to get at Russia, another communist country. It doesn't matter. You made your deal. And then you try and undercut India, who's a democracy, fighting for the liberation of another democratic country, or making another country free, Bangladesh. So you side with the Pakistani, you side with the Chinese against India.
As Indians, we're in a lot of comfortable in our own skin. Like, for example, we are in very comfortable listening to our own epics, our own reading our own literature. Uh, it has a lot been westernized in a sort, and still, even after or 70, 75 years of independence, still we haven't been comfortable knowing our stories. And as you're mentioning Hollywood, I actually had a question about that of how Hollywood shaped the narrative on US to the world, where Bollywood acts as a soft power in our country for sure, and a lot of things that happen in India. When we go abroad, a lot of people talks about Bollywood,
Mm.
but a lot of stories that have been told in Bollywood, for example, of a Raj officer getting an ISI girl. I don't think you will get the same kind of story of a CIA person getting a KGB spy in Hollywood. Do we fail often the way
Mm.
we tell our own stories through various mediums, whether it's literature, whether it's through cinema?
Our stories have been make believe for far too long. Everything is make believe. You're selling dreams. You swung from making movies like Do Biga Zameen and of how harrowing the life of a farmer was, of self pity and that kind of thing. Then we moved on to selling dreams of the dream girl kind of sequences that we had. Everything was unreal, and so we lost our balance somewhere. Nowadays, one does see some movies coming out which show the real life, more down to earth, more enjoyable. I mean, okay, you have this movie which was controversial with Padmavat,
Yeah.
extravaganza, very nice, but unreal,
Mm.
you know. So we get lost. How a movie, a person falls in love with a girl in a burqa, and you don't haven't seen her, then how can you do that? How do you recognize her?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're getting unrealistic about things. Bharati Nari, the ever suffering woman, was a great hit in Indian movies. So we have to get real. This ISI, this story that I know, the tiger,
I
what
guess
was it,
in
Ek
the
Tiger or whatever?
Ek the Tiger.
Ridiculous movie. Uh, Ridiculous movie. So was this other one about chapping going across to uh, Pakistan to give their lost girl back. But क्या बकवास है यार. So it's okay. I can understand where this comes from. After all, you had Superman solving a lot of world's problems
True.
in America. Huh?
Yeah.
But that was comics. That was story for the kids. It was not meant for grown-ups. Surely,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be. It was okay for me to see it when I was 10 or 11 years old, but you don't seriously expect that to be true.
How Russia was one of those first countries to recognize, and I think in the doctrines, as you mentioned as well, that talk about how information is a new and dangerous weapon because it is cheap, universal with unlimited range and durability, easily accessible in the internet age, and capable of crossing international boundaries.
I think the future going to be different from what we have seen in our lifetime. And I don't think armies will cross borders to do that. We'll probably be fighting wars like pandemics, can be one way of doing it.
Mm.
Why was China at all experimenting with this virus? If they knew it was lethal, why were they doing it? Did they have an antidote already with them so that they could save themselves and let it spread elsewhere? I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm just asking these because there are
Mm.
doubts in my mind that how did this happen? Could this be a trial run, or is it genuinely an error? But then I come back to the first question: why at all have this virus developed? With the internet and all the cyberspace, wars are going to be wars of the mind. They're going to disable systems. Why do you think we are so scared of Huawei 5G? Because there is reason to believe that they're all going to collect information and take it back, which many countries have been doing with their equipment. I mean, it's nothing new, but now the extent to which 5G by itself would change your lives completely, and sort of surveillance becomes total oppressive 24/7, and manipulation. You can make every car take a wrong turn, literally, at traffic lights, and you cause 10 traffic jams in a city. You can cripple that city. You don't have to do anything else. You can derail trains. You can cripple the economy. Why do you need anything else? So while we do buy missiles and aircraft, are we actually going to be able to use them, or will they use something else? And our aircraft won't even fly. So these are dangers that I'm sure the governments of the day have thought of, and one hopes that they have counters to it. Not only counters, but their own offensives, because that is perhaps the best defense. Unless your foreign intelligence is the sharpest, you're you're always going to be surprised. And if your internal intelligence and security apparatus is weak, you're always going to be robbed.
Is there anything as we can learn from how the Pakistan states propagate misinformation about Kashmir, and we can reapply the same thing with Balochistan? Because unlike Pakistan sharing a border with Kashmir, we don't share a border with Balochistan. Is there something we can apply there for the information warfare?
You can do it. It can be done, but what next? Kashmir the border hai, they can do mischief, carry on. What do we do in Balochistan? So it's a limited operation, but we have made a lot of mistakes in Kashmir. We've let that slip, in the sense that we let it has become our handling of Kashmir could have been tougher and stronger. We've still not been, the 300, the refugees that we got from Kashmir, Pandit, have to rectify that
Yeah.
if you're a strong government.